My name is Robert Key. I've lived in Salisbury for over 70 years for most of the time. I've also lived in Truro and in London and in Edinburgh. I have seen massive changes in my time here, as you can imagine. The first 16 years of my life I was a teacher of economics, and I taught in Edinburgh, and I taught at Harrow School in northwest London for 14 years. And then I was selected as the Conservative candidate for my home city of Salisbury, and I served for 27 years as Member of Parliament, and I served in the governments of Margaret Thatcher and John Major. It was very daunting to be serving under Margaret Thatcher, but she was, as I learned, a wonderful leader and a wonderful person to be Prime Minister. All the stories you hear about her are mostly fictional and full of prejudice. She was a wonderful person. She came from a humble background, as indeed did I. My father was a priest in the Church of England, and she understood what made the country tick. She had no time for ideologies. She had her own right-wing views that were nothing like as right-wing as where we are today. But if you ever had a problem as a minister and you went to talk it through with her, she'd look you straight in the eye and ask you what was wrong. And if she agreed with you, if you convinced her, she would change government policy. So it was a joy to work for her, and it was a joy to work for John Major. The difference was that Margaret Thatcher had a huge majority. John Major had to run the country on a minority government without a majority at every vote. So that's why he was sometimes perceived as dithering. He wasn't, it's just that he recognised the boundaries of what he could do. So they were very different personalities. I was very fond of them both, and a great contrast to today. Politics has changed, and I'd like to tell you a secret. Most people haven't noticed it, but the people running the main political parties know perfectly well. When I started, party politics was a mass membership thing. The Conservative Party had over 1 million members. In my constituency here in Salisbury, we had over 4,000 members. We had 44 Conservative branches in the villages and wards of the constituency. That has now shrivelled to a shadow of its former self, and that's true right across the country and in all parties. So we're not any longer mass membership organisations. We're organisations run by an ever smaller clique of people. That makes them more powerful and voters less powerful, and it's a bad idea. So it's changed because too much power is concentrated in the hands of too few people. My own party has swerved to the right, and I'm still a Conservative. I will always be a Conservative, but I cannot possibly support some of the things that the current Conservative government has been doing, like cutting overseas aid, cutting universal credit, adding national insurance to the poorest people as well as the richest. Quite wrong. They could have just put up income tax by a penny in the pound. So there are all sorts of things, ways in which it's changed. The way politics is done has changed so much, and not for the better. And one way we can move out of that is, in my view, to change and reform our electoral system so that we have proportional representation instead of winner takes all, first past the post. Because that's extraordinary, you know. Most of the time, most of the decisions that the government makes are against the wishes of most of the people. In the last general election, 71% of the votes cast didn't make any difference to the outcome. We need to change that so that every vote counts. And at the moment, there are people in Salisbury constituency who are Labour supporters. They say, why should I bother to vote? It won't make any difference. Safe Conservative seat. Do you know that's wrong in a democracy? And we have to turn democracy on its head in this country. We really do. And we have to be grown up about it and say, look, if we're going to survive what has been the most divisive era in British politics, not just Brexit, but almost everything has changed. I mean, who would have thought that any government would seek to criminalise the Royal National Lifeboat Institution for saving people at sea. And that's what this government is doing. So we have to change it. And we have to say, if we're going to be a 21st century democracy, we need to be like other 21st century democracies, and we need to share power, not hoard it. And sharing power means sharing ideas and sharing votes. And in other words, yes, having coalitions, not just at Westminster, but in all our city councils, county councils, town councils. It's a sensible and grown-up way of performing the duty of politicians. Somebody once said in New York, it's time the world grew up. It's time Britain grew up, and that's why we need to change. I watched the debate at the Labour Party conference on proportional representation, and there were remarkable speeches, a lot of young people speaking in favour of change, and only 2 or 3 people actually speaking against the motion to adopt PR. So over 80% of the constituency Labour parties in the country are in favour of change. But when it came to a card vote as opposed to a show of hands, the motion was blocked by the trade unions. That is a real challenge for the Labour Party, because if they're careful, the Labour Party will never be elected if they can't reform. What about the Conservative Party? Yes, the Conservative Party could change, but I suspect it only will change when it's been defeated at the polls. I regret that very much, but I think it's going to have to be that way. Certainly, under the current flip-flop leadership of Boris Johnson, it won't change. The power lies elsewhere, European Research Group and others. So they won't change. So until a Conservative government is defeated, which looks less and less likely because of the way the left is refusing to have a centre-left alliance, so that you only have one left-of-centre candidate, and not 4 competing ones. And until we start taking seriously the voice of people who vote Green, which we have not done in this country so far, whatever we may think about some of the things they believe in, we live in a democracy. So I am hopeful. I do think that even the Conservative Party in the long run can change, and I think it would be in the interests of the Conservative Party to reform and support proportional representation as the only way it's going to survive. Politics always swings, but it usually swings about a point in the middle somewhere. And the only Labour government we've seen in the past decade or two has been Tony Blair's, when New Labour decided they'd got to reclaim the centre ground as well as the left. And it was a great success for many years. And so the Labour Party now is trying to find a new way forwards, and it's obviously very painful. But I do think that both parties will swing back to the centre. I think that's where most people want it to be in this country. There are always going to be left-wingers and right-wingers. We live in a democracy. We don't shoot people for their views. So let's grow up, and let's decide that we do want to have some sort of proportional representation where every vote counts, every person's views are listened to and heard, and everyone feels part of the way in which we are governed, as opposed to just feeling my vote will never matter here, or we'll always win here anyway, we have safe seats. So let's grow up, and I'm sure we can and we should. And this is an ancient country with an ancient constitution, and we will find our way through, and we will become a sensible government of the centre. That's what we've had, slightly left, slightly right, over the years. And it led us to be a very prosperous, peaceful, happy, contented country, which we are not now. When I was 65, I decided that the people of Salisbury needed someone younger to represent them. And so I first of all had basically almost a year off doing very little. But I then was the chairman of the Salisbury Cathedral Magna Carta Trust for the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta, on which the entire British nation rests. And I spent time then working with the National Magna Carta Trust, and we produced a wonderful time in Salisbury, just as nationally Sir Robert Worcester achieved remarkable things. So I did that. And as a result of that, I spent 5 years lecturing for Cunard, the shipping company, on their Three Queens, lecturing on Magna Carta, on history, mostly Norman, Plantagenet history, and on regional issues like the Baltic or Iceland or Ireland. And after 5 years, I stopped that and started doing more local lecturing and enjoying visiting my family and my grandchildren.